It's the Winter Flounder Management Board. We're starting at 10:30, and we're scheduled to go to 12 o'clock, but obviously that time is going to be changed. All right. Good morning, everyone. I had an option today to wear this sweatshirt or to wear the vest that I received last year at the annual meeting in New York City. I chose not to wear the one from New York City because of the pain that still is within my system with the New York Giants beating the Patriots twice in the Super Bowl. Anyways, with that said, by the way, I did meet a gal in the elevator going up, and she had a Philadelphia Eagle sweatshirt on, and I did give her nothing but praise for what the Eagles did last year. Patriots fans are not as arrogant as some may think. Okay. Even though I'm wearing the sweatshirt. All right. You have the agenda before you. Is there any desire to make modifications to the agenda? I see no desire to make any changes. Therefore, the agenda will be approved as written. Proceedings are available. I'm assuming that many of you have had a chance to go over those proceedings. Any desire or need to make a revision to those proceedings? All right, I see none. Therefore, without objection, the proceedings from May 2018 will be adopted. Public comment. Anyone in the audience care to make any reference, make any comment to an item specific to winter flounder management that is not on the agenda? All right, I see none. This meeting is only scheduled to be about a half an hour. I expect that it won't take any more than a half an hour, maybe even 15 minutes, but we'll see. Next on the agenda is consider specifications for the 2019 fishing year. Final action. And as noted in the documents giving us the blueprint for this meeting, per addendum 3, we can adjust through board action the recreational limits, the size limit, the bag limit, the season. Commercial, we can do the size limit, the season, the trip limit, the trigger trip limit, area closures. We have all those options we got in the 2019 fishing year. I'm going to pause here and turn to Megan and have her provide a overview of the winter flounder specifications for 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, so we're going to review winter flounder specifications and then also our recent catch numbers. So this slide here is our current management measures for both the Gulf of Maine and the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic winter flounder stocks. And these are the regulations that have been in effect since 2014. And if no action is taken by the board, then the management measures will roll over into 2019. So for the Gulf of Maine, we have a 500-pound commercial trip limit and an 8-fish recreational limit. And then in Southern New England Mid-Atlantic, it's a 50-pound commercial limit and a 2-fish recreational limit. That Southern New England Mid-Atlantic fishery, those regulations are quite strict because it's supposed to be a bycatch only fishery. As our chairman noted, under Addendum 3, the board can adjust a suite of measures through board action. They're listed on the screen here. I won't read through all of those again. So the 2017 fishing year provides the most recent information on our catch estimates. So I thought I would review those with the board today. This is the slide for Gulf of Maine catch estimates. So on the top row there, we have our total ACL, which was set as 776 metric tons. And then our catch was 308.1 metric tons. So overall, we were well below that ACL. On the bottom there, we have the state water subcomponent. I did want to draw the board's attention to that if we go to the next slide. So it was set at 122 metric tons. Our catch was 185.3 metric tons. So we were above the state water subcomponent. There's no accountability measure associated with that, so there's not a payback or a penalty. But I did want to note that our 2018 to 2020 state water subcomponent is set at 67 metric tons. And then this slide is the fishing year 2017 catch estimates for Southern New England and Mid-Atlantic. Again, on the top, we have our total ACL, which was set at 749 metric tons, and our catch was 550.5 metric tons. So again, we were below the ACL. For the state water subcomponent, it was set at 70 metric tons, 23.2 metric tons were caught, so we were well below that. And the 2018 to 2020 state water subcomponent is set at 73 metric tons, so there's really not much of a difference moving forward there. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for Megan? David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick points. If anybody looks at the minutes from previous meetings, you'll know I have consistently complained about this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I want to pick on the southern New England portion of this. And just, if you look at the document, and I'll just use the numbers right out of the document, in southern New England, we're basically landing 1.2 million pounds from federal waters and 50,000 pounds from state waters. And my biggest complaint with this is we have two inconsistent management strategies in place for the two areas. The states are managing this, whether for right or wrong, and I'm not saying that the commission is right on this. I'm saying that we're managing this in an extremely conservative manner. The council is not. The council has a completely different extraction policy, and I think my own view is these two extraction policies are inconsistent. At some point here, we need to get technical review from our committee, basically, to ask them whether or not these two extraction policies are consistent. If they're consistent, then they should continue. If they're not consistent, then we should change them so that they're consistent. Otherwise, it's a bit of a charade that is what we've got going on here. So I would hope, regardless of what we do today, even if it just continue the measures, that we would refer this to the technical committee and ask them explicitly whether or not the extraction policy in federal waters is consistent with the extraction policy that the commission maintains for the stock. And if anybody wants to take the other side of the argument on this, I'm happy to be educated if I've misstated the facts. Thank you.
Okay, questions of Megan? Yes, Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Megan, for your presentation. So, relative to what the issues that Dave Borden just raised, I fully agree with Dave on that. And also, relative to that, the table that's in our information packet and the slide that you put up about the commercial and recreational possession limits, and I'm focusing really on the commercial possession limits there. Is my understanding correct that those are for the state fisheries only? You know, to piggyback on what Dave was talking about, right? So federal people with federal permits fishing in federal waters are fishing under totally different trip limits than state waters. Is that correct?
Correct. The trip limits in the table apply to non-federal permit holders, so state-only permit holders.
I'll highlight one thing, Emerson, that in Massachusetts, if a federally permitted fisherman is fishing in Massachusetts waters with the appropriate permits, they're still required to live with the state limit and not the federal limit. So they can't come in and take large amounts in excess of what's being allowed for someone who just has a state permit. Questions for Megan? Okay, I see no additional questions. Therefore, we go right to the specifications. As indicated by Megan, unless there is a motion to make a change in the specifications for the 2019 fishing year, the specifications will roll over. So, is there a motion to make any changes or revisions to the specifications that we had for 2018 fishing year? All right. I see no motion for a revision. Therefore, the specifications, those that have been described by Megan in her presentation, roll over to the 2019 fishing year. All right, next on the agenda is the Fishery Management Plan Review. State compliance reports were due on December 1st, and now we'll have a presentation describing those reports, and we'll see if any recommendation comes out of those.
Good morning. I'll be presenting on the winter flounder FMP review for the 2017 fishing year. The 2017 operational stock assessment determined that the Gulf of Maine winter flounder stock biomass status is unknown and that overfishing is not occurring. 2016 biomass for fish over 30 centimeters was estimated to be 2,585 metric tons, and the exploitation rate was estimated to be 0.086, below the exploitation threshold of 0.23. Significant sources of uncertainty include gear catchability and deriving stock biomass from area swept survey estimates. The 2017 operational stock assessment concluded that the southern New England, Massachusetts winter flounder stock is overfished, but overfishing is not occurring. Specifically, the 2016 spawning stock biomass was estimated to be 4,360 metric tons, well below the biomass threshold of 12,343.5 metric tons. In addition, fishing mortality was estimated to be 0.21 in 2016, below the threshold of FMSY 0.34. Notable sources of uncertainty include the estimate of natural mortality and the length distribution of recreational discards, given they represent a small portion of the catch. Commercial and recreational landings have declined since the 1980s. Specifically, commercial landings peaked at 40.3 million pounds in 1981, but have generally declined throughout the 1990s and 2000s. In 2017, commercial landings were 2.3 million pounds, with the majority of landings, about 80%, taken in Massachusetts. Recreational harvest in 2017 was 138,477 pounds and represents a significant decrease from the 16.4 million pounds caught in 1982. Between 2013 and 2016, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York comprised the majority of coast-wide recreational winter flounder harvest. In 2017, Massachusetts had the highest recreational harvest. Maine and New Hampshire recreationally harvested the second and third highest amounts of winter flounder, though the PSE values of the data are very high and indicate very imprecise estimates. Winter flounder are currently managed under Amendment 1 and Addenda 1 to 3. The management measures presented above for 2018 have not changed since 2014. Under Amendment 1, the states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York are required to continue annual surveys of juvenile recruitment to develop an annual juvenile abundance index for winter flounder. In addition, the states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Jersey are required to continue annual surveys to develop an index of spawning stock biomass. All states met this monitoring requirement. All state management programs are consistent with the FMP, and there were no requests for de minimis for the 2019 fishing season. The PRT recommends the Board approve the 2019 FMP review and state compliance reports. I will now take any questions. Thank you.
All right, any questions of Jessica? All right, no questions. I'm going to pause for 1 second. I have to consult with Megan. All right. Thank you, Jess. Do I have a motion from any member of the board to accept the 2019 FMP review and state compliance reports? Emerson, you make that motion. Is there a second?
Yes.
That's from Bob Ballou. All right, the motion is on the floor. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? All right, then it stands approved. Next on the agenda is an item I thought would be useful to bring forward to the board to make everyone aware of this paper. You will have a copy of the paper. It was sent to you, it's on the web as one of our reading materials for today's meeting. And I'm the first one to admit that it's a bear of a paper, very difficult to read, and the best thing to focus on basically is the abstract and the discussion. Written by six scientists from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center out of New Jersey, out of Woods Hole, and out of Narragansett. And it's entitled Rebuilding in the Face of Climate Change. I just wanted to highlight, for the benefit of the board, an issue that's of overarching concern to ASMFC as an organization, and that is the effect of climate change, ocean warming on these important resources that we manage, that we regulate. Some rather profound conclusions that might also pertain, with further investigation, to fluke, black sea bass, maybe some other stocks. I'll only highlight a few points that are in this document and then turn to you, board members, for your reaction in terms of the implications of this particular paper. And this would be, again, in the discussion section, next to last page. They use winter flounder as an example to document the effects of ocean warming on stock size, on rebuilding efforts. And right at the top of the first paragraph it says, in our winter flounder example, there is evidence that winter conditions are driving changes in productivity. Warmer winter estuarine temperatures enabled greater predation on the early life stages, decreasing the number of recruits expected per spawner and the stock recruitment relationship. Goes on to say, in the northern hemisphere, increasing temperature is likely to negatively impact species at the southern extent of their range. With particular respect, the southern New England, Massachusetts, I always say Massachusetts, sorry about that, it's that parochial thing. With particular respect to the southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder example, however, the results are not without question, so they highlight some of the uncertainty. But then it goes on to say towards the end that future projections of stock biomass, with the conditions over the last 5 years, suggest the stock will not be able to attain the spawning stock biomass MSY, while the exact estimate of biomass will vary with the explicit assumption made for the projection models. It goes on from there. The reduction in recruitment, and here's the important factor, with the reduction in recruitment due to changes in productivity as a function of temperature or other factors, will likely make it challenging for southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder to achieve and, more importantly, sustain its biomass above the rebuilding target. So, again, wanted to bring this to your attention because it has implications for our further discussions about what to do with winter flounder management down the road, not too far down the road, certainly with southern New England and mid-Atlantic winter flounder, with which we're all very familiar. So any reaction to the paper? Any suggestions as to how we might want to deal with the findings, with the conclusions reached by these very prominent scientists from Woods Hole, Narragansett, and New Jersey? And by the way, Jonathan Hare, of course, who's the director of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, is one of the authors of the paper. Any thoughts regarding this particular paper and its findings? Okay. Babalu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, just to sort of state the obvious, it strikes me that winter flounder is not, in fact, at least southern New England, mid-Atlantic, not overfished, but rather depleted due to climate change. And just that sort of characterization is something that I think perhaps this board, this commission, is going to need to come to terms with. And I know we've talked a lot about how we characterize stock status, but having just heard the FMP review and again seeing that characterization of overfished, hearing your report on this paper, it just strikes me that we need to change our terms of reference, in essence, based on what the science is suggesting. So that's my immediate response. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this.
Any further comment on the paper? David Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing this forward. I think it's a useful document. My takeaway from the message is slightly different. It means you can't, my read of this is you can't necessarily rebuild a population to the levels that existed previously, historically. But that doesn't mean we can't improve the status of the population with a different management strategy. I think it would be useful, kind of consistent with what I said before, to ask the technical people to review the paper and see whether or not there are other strategies that the commission could utilize to improve the chances of rebuilding, recognizing that we may never be able to rebuild to the levels that existed before.
With that said, David, are you prepared to make a motion regarding the tasking of the plan development team or TC, specific to a review of this paper?
I wasn't prepared to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, but I'd suggest that we do that unless we have objections. If we have objections, I'll cobble together a motion.
All right. Unless there's an objection to tasking the plan development team and or the technical committee to review this paper, we'll have them do that. Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not an objection, but are any of the authors on this paper on the PDT or the technical committee? I just want to ensure that we don't instill bias in anything that we get from those bodies.
Yes, some of the authors are on the technical committee.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that's something that I don't object to this, to the assertion that this should be done. I think it's important to have this review. I think we just need to understand that if there are authors in there may be some bias, that we should make sure we take that into account.
All right, thank you. Plus, they may be able to elaborate and clarify points that are not necessarily well made in the very difficult to understand document. Yeah. Tony.
So the plan development team would not be the right group to do this. One, we don't have a plan development team currently for Winter Flounder. You only have plan development teams when we initiate management action. The TC could be a group. The Assessment Science Committee or Management and Science Committee also may be a group that might be appropriate to look at it. It depends on the complexity of the paper, which I do believe it is not a simple topic. In addition, that it is looking at a lot of species, not just winter flounder. The other thing that I would want to hear the board's thoughts on is, since this is one of the species that we manage complementary with the New England Council, is it something that we would want to seek some input from their SSC on or not?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That was going to be my suggestion, that in addition to the TC reviewing the paper and giving us their recommendations as to its usefulness, its implications, we would also request the New England Council to do pretty much the same thing with its SSC. So if there's no objection to that approach, we will send this document to the PDT, to the technical committee, and we'll also engage a conversation with the council about them doing something similar. Doug.
And I think it's important that as there are communication with the council, we also have communication with the Science Center about this, because ultimately how this comes about is if we have a different rebuilding target as a result of this being new science that's showing that that's suggesting that we can't rebuild to levels that are certainly that we've had historically, that may, when they do the next benchmark assessment, affect what our fishing mortality target is on this. And that's really where you're going to get the change in management, because right now we have a certain F, is the way I understand, we have a certain F because we're trying to rebuild to a higher level. And if that's not possible, if the best science says that that's not, that it's a different rebuilding level, it would change the target fishing mortality.
Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's just very important for us to continue to shine a light on what climate change is doing to fisheries management. Most important as it affects our ability to manage the fishery. So we have to shine the light as much as we can.
Okay, so without David.
A quick point. I agree with the chair's suggestion on the way to proceed on this, but would just add that if the council's willing to do that, then it might be useful, at least in our case, to kind of have the staff develop some terms of reference that we want that process to look at, and then submit a written document so that we make sure that the questions that we're all talking about are clearly brought forth. Thank you.
Justin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following up on what Tony said, I would just advocate for including the Assessment Science Committee as one of the groups to review this, because to me what's not only interesting are the conclusions relative to winter flounder, but the modeling approach described in this paper. And I'm kind of curious as to what degree it might be applicable to other species if stock assessments are at this point sort of routinely considering models that include these environmental parameters and stock recruitment functions. So I think adding the Assessment Science Committee to the body that would review this paper would be a good idea.
All right. So without objection, I'll work with staff, with Megan, to put together the request of the different groups that have been mentioned: the SSC, the Assessment Science Committee, the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and anyone else who can help us better understand the implications of this. Without objection, that's what I will do, working with staff. All right. That brings us to the conclusion of our meeting, except for one other thing, which is other business. Is there any other business to be brought forward to the board for discussion? All right. I see none. Without objection, we'll adjourn. All right.